Hi there, John McAdams here. Thanks a lot for joining me in this video. I'm going to try something a little bit different in this video in terms of subject matter and the way I present things. So leave a comment, let me know what you think about this new way of doing things. Now in this video, we're going to talk about the 5.77-450 Martini Henry cartridge. I'll talk about the history and design characteristics of the round, its performance specifications, what it is like hunting with this cartridge, and we'll share some stories from me and from some other people hunting with it. And yes, I have indeed hunted with this cartridge. I'll also shoot it into ballistic gel. Now this is the illustrious cartridge the British Army used in the late 1800s to include most famously during the Zulu Wars. They replaced the 5.77 Snyder cartridge with the 5.77-450 Martini Henry. Now the 5.77 Snyder was the first purpose-built cartridge the British used designed for use in a breech-loading rifle. Now the 5.77-450 Martini Henry uses a modified 5.77 Snyder case that is lengthened slightly and necked down to .45 caliber, hence the name. Now both were black powder cartridges, and there are two common Martini Henry loads. The first is their carbine load. This one fired a 410 grain lead projectile, pushed by about 70 to 71 grains of black powder, and you got a muzzle velocity of about 1,150 feet per second out of it. They also used a rifle load, firing a 480 grain lead bullet, pushed by about 85 grains of black powder, and that delivered about 1,350 feet per second of muzzle velocity. Now you might have noticed the ballistics of those two loads are very similar to those of the American 4570 government cartridges. These two cartridges are not directly related in any way, but they both came out around the same time. They both are .45 caliber projectiles, both used similar amounts of black powder to also push a bullet of a similar weight at a similar velocity. And they were both early iterations of metallic cartridges used in breech action rifles by the Americans and the British, respectively. Now, the 5.77-450 Martini Henry cartridge was, of course, used in the Martini Henry rifle. Now, the British equipped their cavalry units with a carbine with a 21-inch long barrel, and their infantry used one of several different models of the rifle that were both larger and heavier. 33.2-inch long barrels were standard with those rifles. Now, most people familiar with the Martini Henry rifle and cartridges probably associate them with the Zulu movies. That's where I first heard of them myself. There are two Zulu movies. The movie Zulu Dawn came out in 1979, starring Peter O'Toole and Burt Lancaster. It was the second movie made, but covered events that happened earlier in real life. Then there was the original Zulu movie that was released in 1964, starring Stanley Baker and Michael Caine, about the Battle of Rorke's Drift. This was like I said, the original and the most popular of the two Zulu movies. The Martini Henry rifle and cartridge feature prominently in both of those movies, and the British soldiers at those battles in real life used that equipment as well. I loved those movies as a kid, especially the original Zulu movie. As a matter of fact, I love them so much, I asked my grandmother to make a replica British Army uniform for me when I was a boy. And my grandfather also fashioned a toy Martini Henry rifle for me to play with as well. Now fast forward a few years, and they bought me a real deal Martini Henry rifle as a college graduation present. I took this rifle to Africa with me on my first safari in 2006. Now this is a somewhat unusual rifle for a couple different reasons. For one thing, it was made by Jeffrey. I'm not exactly certain of the origin story of this rifle, but I'm inclined to believe that a British officer had it made custom for him, and then he took it overseas to Africa or India or wherever he ended up going. Now, what is also unusual about this rifle is that it is in fantastic condition. The British made over 1 million Martini Henry rifles, so these rifles are not uncommon. You can find them on Gunbroker, you can find them at gun shows occasionally. But the ones you usually run across are often in rough shape. Remember, these are military rifles. They got used, and they were also black powder rifles. So, dings, scratches, rust, pitting, all those things are pretty common on a lot of the Martini Henry rifles you run across. Not this one though. Like I said, it's in great shape. I'm not exactly certain of the origin story, like I said, but whoever had this either didn't use it very much or took really good care of it. Now, as you can see, this rifle is long. It has a 33-inch barrel and it's like 49.5 inches long. I actually had to buy a brand new gun case to take on the plane when I went to Africa because I didn't have one that was long enough to fit it. And I managed to find one at a Gander Mountain by my house that was just barely long enough. I have less than a ½ inch to spare inside of it, but it worked. Now, this rifle has a surprisingly good trigger, and it also has a really long sight radius. And it's surprisingly pleasant to shoot as well. Recoil is not too bad with it. It's not excessively heavy to carry or anything like that. As a matter of fact, everyone that has ever shot that rifle has always commented, "Oh wow, this thing pretty good to shoot," after they get to shoot it. Now, like I said, I brought that rifle with me to Africa in 2006 on a hunt, and getting it ready to go was quite the chore. It's really hard to find loaded ammo for the Martini Henry these days, and what you do find is usually stuff like this that is both black powder and a collectible, so you don't want to be necessarily going out and hunting with it. And reloading it is pretty tricky as well. Heck, even getting bullets for this thing is tough, because even though it is nominally a .45 caliber cartridge, it doesn't use .458 caliber bullets like you see with most other .45 caliber cartridges. Now, they will work, you can put them in there, but they probably won't shoot very accurately for you. Now, bore diameters are all over the place with these rifles, but it seems like most of these rifles shoot bullets in the .461 to .468 inch range most accurately. Now, this rifle that I have shoots .466 inch bullets really, really well. But therein lies another problem. Can't just go out and find .466 caliber bullets, not easily anyway. But my dad and I managed to get some custom .466 caliber 400 grain jacketed bullets made by Hawk Custom Bullets. They shoot really accurately out of this rifle. Now, I developed a smokeless load for this rifle with my dad, and we were getting about 1,500 feet per second out of it. Getting brass is another big issue with this cartridge, and we ended up getting Jameson to custom make some brass for me, made from 24 gauge brass shotgun shells. Now, fortunately, you can get reloading dies for the cartridge. I know Lee Precision does make dies, and maybe other people do, I don't know, but that's what we ended up getting. But once we got all that stuff sorted out, like I said, that load shot outstanding out of my rifle. Now, the British used this rifle out to 1,000 yards in a volley fire situation, and I have heard credible reports of individual soldiers hitting targets out past 400 yards with the Martini Henry. I personally have shot steel plates out to 250 yards with it, no issue at all. That was just as far as the range went that I've shot it at. There's no way I would shoot an animal out that far with it though, but this is I feel pretty confident out to say 125, maybe 150 yards with it. Now, this rifle and load worked great for me in Africa. I shot a beautiful warthog on the first day of my hunt at about 100 yards. That was a big warthog, but I made a good shot and he went about 75 yards and then expired. That was my first African animal. Awesome experience. I shot a springbok a few days later, about 150 yards in that case. And I shot a kudu with this rifle at about 75 yards a few days after that. I made a good shot right into the shoulder. He went less than 50 yards after the shot, and that actually is the animal I am most proud of from that hunt. Now, I recovered my bullet from the kudu, and as you can see, there's not a lot of expansion with it. It's smashed down a little bit and torn up just a tiny bit, but it was not very impressive terminal performance. Upon reflection, I think that bullet was just not going fast enough for optimum expansion. Like I said, it was only going about 1,500 feet per second. We got the thinnest jacket that we could for it, but even that was, I guess, too thick for the very sedate velocities we were shooting it at. Now, the cartridge did have a reputation for inflicting pretty severe wounds on the battlefield, but that was with these lead bullets, not jacketed bullets. Now, like I promised, I did shoot one of these custom loads that we made with the jacketed bullets into ballistic gel. And just like I suspected, performance was not that impressive. I got real good straight line penetration through most of that first gel block. Then you can see the bullet tumbles, flips around backwards, continues to penetrate in a straight line, loses a little bit of lead in the gel, and then stops facing rearward in the third gel block. So impressive penetration, but not a really big wound cavity. So that jives pretty well with what I observed on those animals afield. It is a .45 caliber projectile, so it is making a decent sized hole as it goes through the animal, even if it doesn't, mushroom or upset in any way. But it's also not dramatically impressive performance either compared to a modern hunting bullet at a much faster velocity. Now, I did also source some other loaded ammunition for the Martini Henry with a more traditional lead bullet. This is modern production stuff with smokeless powder instead of an old black powder vintage load like that. I also shot that into ballistic gel. Performance was also very disappointing with it, and it did not expand at all either. Performance is almost identical to that jacketed bullet. So I'm not really sure what the deal is here. I don't know if this is maybe a little bit harder lead than they used back in the day for the Martini Henry, or if that's also just how they performed. And remember, this was just shooting into bare gel as well. You shoot into a bone or something like that, and you might get very different results. And maybe that is what a lot of people were basing their assessments of the cartridge off of, with their use on people on the battlefield and on animals when they were out hunting. Now, I'm not the only person to hunt with this cartridge. Like I said, the British made piles of these rifles. They replaced the Martini Henry with the Lee Metford and eventually the Lee Enfield in the late 1800s, but there are still lots and lots of those rifles out there, especially in a lot of the old British colonies, especially in India and in Africa. I ran across a very old Martini Henry that was in really rough shape when I was in Afghanistan. I'm not sure if that was a Khyber Pass copy of a Martini Henry or if it was just, like I said, a really old original Martini Henry that some British soldier used way back in the day and it got left there one way or another. Now, additionally, this cartridge also did have a pretty good reputation for being effective on felines, big cats, lion, leopard, tiger, over the years as well. And I could certainly see how this lead bullet could be darn effective on them, especially if it hit a bone or something like that. Now, especially when you consider the prevalence of this rifle and cartridge in areas where there were lots of lions, tigers, and leopards in the British colonies over the years, I'm sure thousands, maybe tens of thousands of cats have fallen to the Martini Henry. In particular, Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson talks about killing the second of the two man-eaters of Tsavo with a Martini Henry in his book, The Man-Eaters of Tsavo. I'll read that passage to you because it's pretty interesting. Now, at this point, he is following up the second lion, which he has previously wounded with his .303 British. And before this passage begins, he mentions that he has a gun bearer going with him that is carrying a Martini Henry carbine. And Patterson still is using his .303 in this passage when I start reading to you. Looking cautiously through the bushes, I could see the man-eater glaring out in our direction and showing his tusks in an angry snarl. I at once took careful aim and fired. Instantly, he sprang out and made a most determined charge down on us. I fired again and knocked him over, but in a second, he was up once more and coming for me as fast as he could in his crippled condition. A third shot had no apparent effect, so I put out my hand for the Martini, hoping to stop him with it. To my dismay, however, it was not there. The terror of the sudden charge had proved too much for Mahina, and both he and the carbine were by this time well on their way up a tree. In the circumstances, there was nothing to do but follow suit, which I did without loss of time. And, but for the fact that one of my shots had broken a hind leg, the brute most certainly would have had me. Even as it was, I had barely time to swing myself up out of his reach before he arrived at the foot of the tree. When the lion found he was too late, he started to limp back to the thicket. But by this time, I had seized the carbine from Mahina, and the first shot I fired from it seemed to give him his quietus, for he fell over and lay motionless. Rather foolishly, I at once scrambled down from the tree and walked up towards him. To my surprise and no little alarm, he jumped up and attempted another charge. This time, however, a Martini bullet in the chest and another in the head finished him for good and all. He dropped in his tracks not 5 yards away from me and died gamely, biting savagely at a branch which had fallen to the ground. Now, John Taylor also mentions in his book, African Rifles and Cartridges, that He had a gold inlaid Martini Henry that was his favorite rifle for hunting lions, and talks about killing a lot of lions in that book. He also said he was very sorry to lose that rifle in a hippo-induced boating accident. Now, I can tell you, if I personally ever get the opportunity to hunt leopard or lion, I won't be using my Martini Henry for that task, but it will darn sure get the job done. That is especially true when you consider just what these guys had available to use at the time in the 1870s, 1880s, etc. There just weren't a lot of other really good alternatives. The .303 British Lieutenant Colonel Patterson used on those lions on his hunt in 1898 is a far cry from the .303 British we have access to today. A modern soft point hunting bullet from a .303 or similar cartridge is a deadly choice for use on a thin-skinned animal, to include a bigger one like a lion or a tiger. But he was almost certainly using the 215 grain full metal jacket bullet the British military used at the time on that hunt for those lions. Those bullets penetrated very well, but they did not mushroom and they weren't prone to tumbling, or they would often travel a long distance within soft tissue before tumbling. Perhaps you've heard of a dum-dum bullet. Well, the British were so disappointed by the so-called stopping power of the .303 British, they developed new ammunition at the dum-dum arsenal in India they designed to cause more severe wounds in the late 1890s. The British also eventually developed a lighter 174 grain full metal jacket specifically designed to tumble after traveling a short distance in soft tissue and thus cause more severe wounds. But that bullet did not come along until just prior to World War I, and Lieutenant Colonel Patterson did not have access to it. Furthermore, my research leads me to believe vintage Martini Henry ammo used a softer lead bullet than what I tested in this video. Those bullets seemed much more prone to mushroom to a gigantic size upon impact that was as big or bigger than a modern jacketed 45-70 bullet and cause severe wounds. Now, even these Martini Henry bullets I tested in this video that did not mushroom at all and traveled a long distance before they began to tumble. Such a long distance, in fact, they likely would have exited an animal before they started to do anything in that realm. Even those bullets would make a larger wound cavity than a .303 caliber bullet that did not mushroom or tumble. But if you compare a tiny wound from a full metal jacket .303 bullet that just zips straight through an animal with a 45 caliber lead bullet that massively deforms or even flattens upon impact, then it's easy to see why the Martini Henry cartridge got the reputation it did on thin-skinned game, to include the big cats. Now, in addition to those big cats, I'm sure lots of antelope have fallen to the Martini Henry over the years. Probably a couple of buffalo as well, but I also would not use that for a buffalo hunt either today, considering that we have things much better suited for the task anyway. Now, let me know your thoughts on this subject. Have you used a 5.77 450 Martini Henry, either at the range or a field? Tell me more about it in the comments. Likewise, leave a comment. Let me know what you thought about this new subject matter and style that I'm using in some of my videos. Now, if you enjoyed this video and you want more content along these lines, go to thebiggamehuntingblog.com/ebook. Sign up there. You'll get a free ebook I have written on the best hunting calibers. I've also put that link in the video description and in the pinned comment. No promises, but if you're looking for some, I might be able to help you find some Martini Henry components and ammunition if you sign up. And finally, make sure you hit that subscribe button below this video so you don't miss out on any of my other future videos, and be sure to hit that thumbs up button. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a great day and good hunting.